This is Judge Joe Brown, and we're listening to We All Be News. News-free Dixie for the 21st century.
Welcome, Black family, to another wonderful edutainment edition of The Artivist Thinks. Today's show we'll be talking about the Walter Scott shooting in North Charleston, South Carolina. North Charleston is a city not to be confused with Charleston, South Carolina. There are two cities in the same vicinity of the state of South Carolina. But here's the thing. I know a lot of people have been talking about on the internet, on and off, are very concerned about the recent elevated incidents of police brutality and police shootings as it concerns melanated or black people. And I just want to say, which is very interesting, somebody, or some people rather, brought up the issue that perhaps the shooting of Walter Scott could be the beginnings of a race war. Once again, people have been saying recently that the shooting of brother Walter Scott could have the makings of a race war. And people say, well, that's kind of far-fetched, but I wouldn't necessarily throw that out. Because you want to understand something. Ever since the first African came to America under colonial rule as indentured servants, later as enslaved, we have been in a race war. Racism is a societal construct. White supremacy is a societal construct. And South Carolina is one of the original 13 colonies. Once again, South Carolina is one of the original 13 colonies. Some of the most important wars of the American Revolutionary War were fought in South Carolina. And let us not forget that in Charleston, South Carolina's harbor, Fort Sumter, that's Fort Sumter in the harbor of Charleston, South Carolina, is where the first shots of the Civil War, of the American Civil War, was fired on April 12, 1861. That's in Charleston Harbor at Fort Sumter. The first shots of the American Civil War was fired there, once again, April 12, 1861. And also, looking at Charleston Harbor, 40% of enslaved Africans that came to this country came through Charleston Harbor, through Charleston, South Carolina's harbor. Once again, let me say this. 40% of enslaved Africans that came to America came through Charleston Harbor. So South Carolina is a very African state, is a very oppressive state. So this is the history of South Carolina. And North Charleston, which is next to Charleston, South Carolina, is no exception. And let me say one more thing as it relates to the history of racism, white supremacy, oppression in South Carolina. Charleston, South Carolina is where the legendary freedom African fighter Denmark Vesey tried to lead an insurrection. Once again, Denmark Vesey, the legendary African freedom fighter, tried to lead an insurrection in Charleston, South Carolina. Some black folks snitched on him, some coons snitched on him to the white oppressors, and he was hanged along with 20 plus or 23 of his co-conspirators, excuse me. I hope about 20 something of them were hanged at a tree in Charleston called the Hangman Tree or the Hanging Tree. And the site where, Denmark Vesey was allegedly hanged is still there on a one-way street. Now, my understanding, they cut down the original hanging tree, but there's a tree that was planted in its place about 30 years ago, perhaps, and it's still as foreboding as probably the original tree was. It's very scary things on a one-way street. If you didn't know the history of Charleston, South Carolina, as it relates to slavery and the repression of African liberation, then you would think that that was a friendly, gentrified street with no history. But sadly mistaken, this is not the case. And Charleston, South Carolina was a financial stronghold for slavery as well. A lot of folks got a lot of wealth from the slave trade in Charleston, South Carolina area. So look at North Charleston. So this is not too far to say that this could perhaps be the makings of a race war. But I would also say that we already had a race war going on. And sometimes we don't understand, because a lot of people think of war is about, when they think of war, they think of the popular Hollywood notion of a war, which is you see tanks and AR-15s and fighter jet planes and stuff like that, and bombs exploding. There are different types of wars that you can fight. For example, the propaganda war. The propaganda war. When the Walter Scott shooting first came to the public's attention, the narrative was controlled by Michael Slager. I got a friend at Black Talk Radio Network, Brother Scotty Reed, the founder and director there. He joked on one of his shows. He called him Michael Slager, the Black Man Slayer. He called him Michael Slager, the Black Man Slayer. And what I'm saying is, Michael Slager had a chance to file his report first, and he had some of his comrades collaborate. So there was a conspiracy, some type of collusion among certain officers in the North Charleston Police Department to get behind this blue wall or this blue shield, whatever they call it, no snitch code among police officers to back this man's narrative, although some of them may have had knowledge that Michael Slager was lying. So his lawyer and himself, they all got behind this and they pushed this narrative. And then one brave brother, which is interesting because I noticed that some of our Latino brothers are the ones capturing some of these horrible extrajudicial killings on video, whether it be Ramsey Orta with Eric Gardner up in New York, or this brother down in the Carolinas. He caught this video of the officer shooting this running away black man who was not armed at that moment 8 times in the back, and then throwing the taser over at the dying black man's body. And then you had a black police officer run into the scene, and I guess he co-opted the story, because I know a couple of civil rights organizations are calling that he be charged with some type of murder charge as well, as it relates to the killing of Walter Scott. So people talk about this stuff, but this is like all types of wars. You got the propaganda war, because as soon as that video came out and was released through certain news organizations, then the narrative changes. Just like in the Mike Brown narrative, where Officer Darren Wilson claimed that his eye socket was fractured. And then we found out after the grand jury decision, looking at the photos, his eye socket was never fractured. And not only that, the corporate mainstream news entities never corrected the narrative. They never came back and said, we reported that his eye socket was fractured, and now we're taking it back. So what I'm saying is that with white news media, mainstream news media, it's not about getting the facts. It's about reporting first and controlling the story from there. They're more interested in controlling the story than telling the truth. They're more interested in ratings than telling the truth. They're more interested in the bottom line than telling the truth. So I got to thank God for the people out there in alternative news media land, particularly the black independent news organizations, the non-traditional black independent news organizations, because they have inherited what the old black traditional news organization had, which was the race beat. Now it's up to the alternative media sources of color, the melanated people news, to report the race beat that's going on in America right now with these elevated incidents of police brutality cases throughout the country. Because everywhere really is Ferguson, and we are all behind enemy lines. And speaking of Walter Scott, another thing I want to bring up is the fact that black folks must stop turning to the white man's courts for justice as it relates to child support. Once again, black folks must stop turning to the white man's court, going to try to get justice from Caesar's law as it concerns child support. And also, black folks must stop calling the police on mentally ill relatives. I promise you, most of your relatives are mentally ill from dealing with white supremacy, racism 24/7. To quote the words of James Baldwin, to paraphrase him, to be black in America is to be in a constant rage. To be black in America is to be in a constant rage. So with that said, we got to stop doing that, family. We got to find a way to address our grievances in a very helpful and healthy manner, besides going to the folks that got us in this predicament in the first place. So once again, I laid out some of the facts about, people talking about, is this a race war? I tell you about the history of South Carolina as being one of the original 13 colonies, financed, depended heavily on slavery, and now we look at what's going on right now, and people will say, well, what about voting? Voting is a tool, it's not the ends. It's a means, but it's not the end. Voting is not the solution. I have another tape about that as well. But my verdict on the Walter Scott case, as far as him, Michael Slager, yeah, he was fired from the North Charleston Police Department, but that does not mean he's going to go to jail. You look at what happened in Chicago recently with the Rakia Boyd case. The cop got off. Yeah, it was late to, Michael Slager might get off easily because, the question is, why was Walter Scott running? People say why he's running, because in this country we like to blame the victim, especially if it's black, on their circumstances. You blame the victim for their circumstances. So Michael Slager, was he shooting a guy that was fleeing for arrest? I won't be surprised what they come up with. I would not be surprised of what they come up with to get this man off, or they might let him, take a loss. And you think about what happened with the Renisha McBride case. The sister got shot in the face by the white guy, when she was looking for help after being in a real bad accident. And you think about how many things happened after Renisha McBride. See, white supremacy, they'll let us win one victory. Then we'll take on 1,000 defeats. For every victory we win, we get like 100 defeats. Like, we'll win Renisha McBride, then we'll get a Mike Brown, then we'll get a Tamir Rice, then we'll get an Eric Gardner, then we'll get a Freddie Gray, then we'll get a Walter Scott. It goes on and on and on. They'll let us have one win. Just because you win a battle doesn't mean you win the war. So think about that, family. So don't get too emotionally invested in this media frenzy propaganda as it relates to any of these things going on with our people. But the best thing we'll do as a people is get together and start controlling our narratives and telling our stories on our own platforms and from our own perspective. See, the cops, they got an organization. Everything in America, the people that control America, everybody's in the game. So they always talking about the Gangster Disciples, the Vice Lords, the Bloods and Crips, the Aryan Nation, MS-13. They always talking about these other gangs, but everybody in America, they got powers in a gang. Political power is based on gang power. Mayor Daley was in a gang, the Daley Machine. You look at Al Capone, not just Al Capone. Look at Tammany Hall up in New York City. That was a gang. You look at anybody that got power in this system, they have a gang they belong to. They have a gang mentality. So think about that when the next time you think about what a thug punk is and things of that nature. A lot of thug punks dress in tailor-made suits and got Ivy League degrees. Once again, a lot of thug punks, no good, vicious thugs, dressed in tailor-made suits and got Ivy League degrees. So I hope that answers some questions or concerns. This is something I want to put out there for people to think about. And when we talk about investing in alternative news, black media, think about investing in We All Be, because We All Be is there for all of us. And please feel free to also subscribe to this channel. We got a lot of interesting things in store for you all. This year 2015 is still young, and the best is yet to come on We All Be News and Radio. And also we'll have some updates into the Walter Scott shooting as well that you can't get anywhere else, because we're actually going to be doing some things. I can't talk about them right now, but going to be very interesting things coming up as it relates to We All Be News and reporting on cases like Walter Scott. So blessings to all. Think about donating to We All Be. Think about subscribing to We All Be, and take good care of yourself. In the words of the great Duke Ellington, we love you madly. Keep producing and pushing. The Artivist thinks.